Hi, let's talk about Photoshop. We're going to build on the sketching exercise to use that as a source of base material to explore some of the basic Photoshop editing capabilities and how we might use them in planning docs. Let's start off this time by just looking at the assignment sheet and seeing what's required. I'd appreciate if you always read these closely. So here's a little bit of a capsule description. Here's the deliverable. 3 pages of professional quality. By that I mean sort of formatted and printed, although we won't be printing, PDF images. Sheet 1 and 2, we're going to combine images from Google Earth and our sketched or photos from the sketching workshop. If you don't have a scanned sketch, by scan I mean photograph, or you don't have a good photo, ask somebody in the class, just throw an email out. Doesn't matter what you use for this exercise, you just need some source material. Page 3, I'm looking for an exhibit of the vicinity of your sketch. That is, if you did Chicago or Plano. And it's just a little fade trick. It's a classic Photoshop effect. All right, so it's really straightforward and shouldn't take a bunch of time. Here's the process of what we will do for page 1. First, get hold of whichever sketch or photo you're going to use. That's shown in step 2. Working backwards to step 1, I'm going to go to Google Earth and try and match the perspective of my sketch. I'm just going to do this by eye. I'm going to try and rotate the camera until I get a perspective that matches my sketch perspective. Step 3, add some foliage and people, as we always do, to give the site some scale. And then maybe a couple of effects, touch it up, format it, and that's our finished product. So this, you could say, is sort of like a massing study, where we're showing a very typical type of planning document, what might go in this space. It should be sort of loose and quick, but if the perspective matches, it can be very convincing. Notice how this is fairly convincing. If I was proposing this, might this be, an office park or something, mixed-use development, we get a pretty clear idea of how the massing, lines up with what the existing conditions are. So that's going to be page 1. Page 2, exactly the same thing, only this time we're going to use an eye level or street level perspective instead of the aerial 2-point perspective, which you should now hopefully recognize. So I have my image in mind. I'm going to go to Google Earth, this time Street View, and try and get a perspective that matches it. Add foliage and people. And here's the pro tip: add something in the foreground. Notice I've added this evergreen tree in the foreground, even though its height and stuff doesn't make sense, but this is a classic way to add 3-dimensionality to the scene. And it's called a vignette, where we sort of frame the scene. And notice in the final product, it really helps to sell the 3D effect that we're sort of looking into the page. This perspective is going to be tough because it just is. It's harder to match. We have a pretty good street views. Options are limited, and you probably took your eye-level photo without knowing what it was going to end up as, and it's probably not that good or not that suitable for this. So you do the best you can. Just run through the exercise one more time. Page 3, like I said, is just a classic effect. Take 2 things and do a fade out between the 2. And the idea here is that you would do a sort of vicinity map of where your first 2 photos, where they are located. But if there's something else that interests you, there's some flexibility here. I just want you to understand how to do this somewhat classic fade effect. Now, I've used the most boring and tired imagery here: Google Earth and Google Maps. So if you do this, this is like, it's tired, but it does work. And the fact that you're using 2 different images from the same source means you're going to have a good chance of getting them to align. done a demo of how to do this in a separate video that I'll send you the link to. And I used, I think, a current map or current aerial and historical base map or whatever it was. That's an interesting thing, and we've seen that. I'm sure you've seen that type of thing as well, where you fade between contemporary and historical imagery. That's sort of another classic look. So all very classic visualizations. This may be the most classic. There are other ways to get this. Lots of other ways to achieve pretty much everything that we've been doing in this class. I'm showing you what I believe to be the simplest and most straightforward way in all cases. So let's just spin up Photoshop and take a look and see what we're dealing with. Most of us have done some image editing at some level, maybe not on Photoshop, but something like it. The filters that you use on your phones now and Instagram, it's a bit of a technological miracle. That used to be advanced Photoshop maybe 15 years ago, maybe 20 now, I don't know. But now that you can get these filtered effects and these different looks, and we're all blasé about it, and in fact there's of course the famous hashtag no filter that some photographers use when they want to make sure you understand that they didn't cheat on their photo. That's just how blasé and comfortable we've all become with manipulating images. But there was a time when it was extremely complicated to do such a thing, and it's just gotten so easy to manipulate images. It's actually quite amazing. Everybody takes it for granted, not me though. So this is the image that you saw on the introductory slide. It's just a same old boring Google Earth image, and let's talk about that for a second. What makes this image so boring? Well, we know it's canned, right? We don't believe for a second that this is a true photograph, although it's certainly based on true photographs. That dead flat horizon, but the biggest death here is that flat dead sky, that pure cyan sky. Now, it's not that we haven't seen skies like this, but that's the dead giveaway. And when I'm using photos for even not Google Earth photos, but photos that someone else has taken, I always replace that dead fisheye sky that comes out of photos. Also, that sometimes happens even when you take a picture. If you take a picture on a gray day, that sky is just death. Let me see if I can find a sample of a place where I've photoshopped out the sky. Okay, so here's the image I was looking for. I had to do a cover for a booklet, and they wanted this tractor on the cover. And when you have to produce something specific, this is out in out in the burbs, and they don't send me out to take the photos, so I'm stuck with whatever photographs the field crews come in with. And you can see this is not a great picture. First of all, it's framed poorly. It's got this big shadow in front. There's not, it's just not a great photo. And the biggest dud thing to me is this flat sky, which is not terrible. I've seen a lot worse, but it's a little flat. And when I was fitting this into a cover layout, it just didn't have any pop at all. So one of the things I do all the time, and this is almost like you know, just a sort of fun thing that I do for myself. Most people don't notice it, and if you're doing it right, it doesn't get noticed. But a better photo, at least for the purposes that I was using it, would have it would be shot on a day with a better sky. So it's a relatively small thing in Photoshop to produce a better sky. And if you look in the lower right hand corner here, you can sort of see the clues as to what's going on. So I'm going to turn everything off, get down to the bare concrete that is the gray grid. Here's the original photo that you've seen, and here's the photo, and you can see what I've done is I've deleted the sky and kept everything else. And then in back of that, I just put in a picture of one of my favorite skies. I've got lots of skies on file. And it's important to do, this is a very dramatic sky, actually. Now that you know it's fake, you're like, oh, it looks fake. But if I would have showed you this first, you would have been like, oh, it looks perfectly natural. And that's because I'm sort of matching the horizon. You can see that the horizon line is constant and is consistent in the two pictures. And this is what it would have looked like if the tractor would have been in the foreground of this sky picture, or something close to that anyway. So you can't go crazy, and don't do things with like dramatic sunsets. This is maybe the most dramatic sky I've ever used. And I justify the artistic license because it's a cover for a booklet. And this isn't part of the documentary photographs we took. So I fudged the sky for graphic impact. What is a photo anyway? What do you think a photo is? You may not actually know what a photo is. Here's a photo that caught my eye when I was on a plane, back when people still took planes. And this was in like the American Way magazine, you know, the magazine in the back of the seat. And I flipped through it, and I was, looking for the inflatable pool furniture and the electric dog feeder and all the stuff, and like those that makes those magazines fun to read. And I had actually gone a couple of pages further when something stuck in my brain, and I went back and took a second look at this. And you can see how long ago it was taken, because there's a lot of buildings that should be there that aren't there. But there's something else that's a little off with it that if you're not a local Chicagoan, you might not catch right off the bat. You can see it's titled Chicago's Famous Skyline, dotted with many architecturally significant buildings. And here it's copyrighted, it's a stock photograph. It's all very, sort of predictable, and you've seen photos like this. It's accompanying a story about business in Chicago, or whatever it was. Just one problem, and that's that it's backwards. This is what Chicago's skyline actually looks like. And we know that because we're facing west. We're flying over the lake and facing west, so it's got to be. Sears Tower is south of the Chicago River. The Aon Center, or the Amoco building, is south of the Chicago River, and I'm pretty sure Lake Point Towers and Navy Pier is north of the Chicago River. So you can see now when the city suddenly looks right, the text is backwards. So this is actually how it went to print. And okay, it's not The Economist, it's not Newsweek, but it was a magazine. I don't know how many they print, but it's got to be in the thousands, if not even tens of thousands. It's probably left in the seat packs for a month. So quite an amazing thing to have gone to print. When something is going to print in that quantity at that sort of level, there's something called a press check, where you go in, the designer or the art director will go in and literally have to initial every page of what's being printed to make sure that if something's wrong, you can't come back and say, hey, we're not paying for this print job because you screwed something up. It's like, no, you signed off on it. So working backwards, they printed this. Someone okayed it. Someone looked at it and deemed it okay. Someone laid this out on a page and set it up like this. I'm not sure how it happened. There could be several explanations of why. Could have been a choice. This idea of manipulating photography is something that happens all the time. There's whole websites and books dedicated to this. It's a very famous incident here, where Time magazine decided that you may remember something about the OJ trial, or maybe you saw the documentary on it or the special or whatever that was. But look what happened here. They decided that OJ didn't look guilty enough, i.e. black enough. So amazing misstep, and just couldn't be clumsier. And somebody thought they were taking artistic license with a photo on a documentary photo of this nature and sort of status. And this happens all the time. You can entertain yourself by keeping track of it. It seems like every month or so, some sharp-eyed amateur calls people out on this. This was a missile test, I think an Iraqi missile test. And back in, I forget which regime this was under, but failure to launch is not an option. And here's the actual photo. One of the missiles didn't launch, and you can't have that. You're in trouble if you don't get your missiles to launch. But somebody noticed, and once you know it's there, it's obvious, right? Just like with my sky, it's obvious. But until you know it's there, and look how clumsy this clone job is, just copied the smoke trails over and stuff. Terribly clumsy. And why stop there? I mean, if you're gonna go ahead and break protocol, take it all the way. Here's another one, a little more subtle. This was Kim Jong-un birthday party or some such. You can see they just cleaned it up a little. It almost doesn't even make sense. Why bother? One of my favorite ones where this is the Russian church, and you can see what happened is they didn't like his watch. And clumsy Photoshop. You can see it's the reflection. They forgot to Photoshop out the reflection. And why? Because maybe you don't want it known that your Pope, or whatever the equivalent in the Russian Orthodox Church, is wearing a $40,000, on sale for $30,000, but you get the idea. And this predates digital photography and Photoshop. The Soviet Union was famous for this. You can see on the left, all these historical photos have Trotsky, who was a high up operative in the Soviet sort of Duma, and on the right, the released photos. They would, very 1984, where you go back and adjust history to match the present. So you can see the clear evidence of someone missing. And here they just built it out. And so this was all done by hand, and considering that this was probably touched up on an actual photo negative, it's actually, not too shabby. There's a website that'll do this for you today if you don't want to, get rid of your favorite hated aunt, or pretend you came from a scenic village instead of an industrial wasteland. You can have someone do it for you, and this is so straightforward. You'll be able to make your relatives disappear on your own by the time you're done, even with this basic exercise. It's not that complicated. I've always got my eye out for bad Photoshop. This was something out of like the New York Times magazine. Amazingly terrible Photoshop. We're sort of still kind of thinking about perspective, I hope. And notice how their lines of perspective isn't remotely in touch with reality. And the ironic thing is that the actual photo of the place ain't that bad. It's not. I've certainly stayed in worse places on vacation, and I think the idea was they were trying to make it appear that they were closer to the ocean than they really were. So of course I get that. Okay, so as we move away from Illustrator and into Photoshop, the big difference is that we don't have lines and shapes anymore. It's all about the pixels. Vector artwork is composed of Bezier curves. That's what we were drawing in Illustrator. Now as we move into Photoshop, all we have are these pictures. And pictures are subject to a whole different rule book than vector artwork is. Maybe this has happened to you. You're doing a PowerPoint on the, mating habits of the Costa Rican scarlet macaw, and you've got this image in your head. You're like, I'm going to open with this bright, colorful photo of the bird, and you look online and you find the photo, and it's just what you need, and but it's just a little too small, but that's okay. When you bring it into your slide, it's just actually this big with the photo you downloaded, and you're like, that's okay. I'll just stretch it up and make it larger, and then you end up with this, and that's what's called pixelation. And that's because, unlike on the cop shows where you can enhance an image and make it perfect from a garbage image, in real life, all the pixels that you have in a photo, that's all the pixels you have. And you're almost always in trouble if you take a small photo and just stretch it to make it larger. It's almost always a problem. You're almost always okay to take a large photo and just scale it and make it smaller. It only works in that direction. If you need to make a photo larger or smaller, the resolution is critical. But you can't scale it. You should resize it in Photoshop. And there are limits. You'll never make it 10 times as large and have it maintain resolution, because Photoshop will actually add pixels. And that's the way you actually should resize an image, not just by grabbing it and stretching it larger or smaller. So this gets into this topic of resolution and pixels, and it gets pretty confusing pretty quickly, because pixels are sort of, on the one hand, a physical thing. Like your monitor comes with a pixel rating of how fine the images it produces are. So this concept of resolution starts to become important, and it also gets complex really fast. Like I say, pixels are a physical thing on your monitor, on the screen, but they're also a conceptual thing. So for example, this is a high-res photo. I made it look like this. I made it pixelate to make my point, and certainly this can happen. But these actual squares that we're looking at, these are not individual pixels per se. They're a photo representation of individual pixels. So even when you take a small image and make it larger and you get this pixelation, those aren't, each square is not a pixel anymore. They're still composed of the same resolution that your screen is at. It's just that there's no color information for it to make the smooth lines and gradual color changes anymore. Watch the LinkedIn Learning video on resolution. That's your best bet. They do a better job of explaining it than I do. But it is a problem, and it's a problem that's always been with us. Here's a low-res pixelated print image. Print resolution and screen resolution are two distinctly different things. We tend to kind of conflate them these days because we jump back and forth from print to screen all the time. In general, we talk about pixels per inch and dots per inch. Now, dots per inch hasn't been a real thing in a long time, since the advent of digital printing. Digital printing doesn't use dots anymore. It used to be images were composed of dots, fine dots. The finer the dots, the higher resolution of the photo. You can still see dots per inch if you look at a newspaper. I think they still use screen printing. And when I say screen printing, it's because it was actually a piece of fabric that had holes in it like a screen, and the ink would flow through it, and it would pass usually 4 times for the 4 different colors, and the combination of those colors would make all the colors that you see. And that was called process printing, or 4-color printing, or full color printing back in the day. But we still talk about that. If you were to buy a printer today, I know nobody does anymore, but now with sort of COVID, people wish they had printers at home all of a sudden. It would still come with probably, I believe, a PPI, pixels per inch rating, but there are no pixels anymore. It's just become this measure of resolution. I'm sorry, it would come with a DPI printing, dots per inch, but no home printer has ever printed dots per inch, not in 40 years. So dots per inch, pixels per inch, it's all becomes technical and confusing. So a good sort of rule of thumb is 300 pixels per inch, 300 dots per inch. That'll get you safely from screen to print and back again. Ironically, print is more demanding than screen. You'll see errors in printing on paper much more quickly than you will on the screen. It's just something about the way we perceive it, I think. This reference page, rules of thumb, gives you a little bit of information about working with it. And this on the bottom here, that's straight from Microsoft on how to size for PowerPoint slides. 300 DPI, 300 PPI, that's high res for the most part, but it doesn't tell the whole story because it's a resolution metric. But if you have something that's 72 PPI, that's a low resolution, but it could be 100 inches by 100 inches, something that would never get printed, some massive size thing that's just for the screen, and it'll look like a high-res photo. Some of the phone pictures that you look at on your phone screen are super high-res, but they're actually low pixels per inch. But if you were to ever go to print them at their actual pixels per inch, they'd be massive. And you can see this when you open them up in Photoshop. Here's also some of the basic file types that we've been working with. Photoshop, that's the new one. PSD. Some of the other things, now hopefully you're a little familiar with this after the Illustrator typical section. Know the difference between a PNG and a JPEG, and GIFs or GIFs, and some other formats that you're likely to come across. EPS, I say it's non-editable, but that's not exactly true. You can open them right up in Illustrator, and Illustrator reads them just like an AI file. So it's non-editable like for most people, but we're not most people anymore. We're sort of in the professional software now at this point, so we can edit and do stuff like that with them. All right, so oh, by the way, here's the actual cover that ended up being produced. And you can see the sky fits right in, does not draw your attention, especially I'm playing off that blue in the in this color bar at the bottom. So a lot more dynamic than the actual boring old sky that was there. I don't know. I know somebody's always going to be like, oh, I like the real sky better, but okay, that's fine. Also had to zoom in quite a bit. Look how much I zoomed in. That kills your pixelation also. When you're zooming in, if I look at this image by looking at the image pull down and image size, I can see that it's low resolution, 72 pixels per inch, but it's huge. It's 56 inches by 31 inches. That's going down to 8.5 by 11. So that low res large image I scaled down. Actually, I did some other things, but basically you could say I sort of scaled it down and cropped it and tried to make it a high res image. It still got flagged when I sent it to the printer. So now with online printers, they don't do a, they will send you a proof if you want it, but that's like an extra $50, and that sort of takes the savings from online printing away. So they'll send you a digital proof, and they flagged it as a low-res image. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but the client really had to have his tractor, so I had to use that one photo I had of a tractor. Which actually I was happy that they did that, because that makes me think I'm using a new printer, and so that made me think that they're on the ball, that they caught that. Okay, so there's a little bit about resolution, and here's the slide that I used for the intro slide of this video, and I can check it. I always check images first before I do anything with it. If I'm doing a real project where image size and image fidelity matters, I'm always going to run them through Photoshop first. I never just take an image and drop it right into Illustrator or whatever else. If I can make it smaller, I will. In this case, I sized it up to my benchmark of 300 pixels per inch for use in the video. It's probably overkill, but that's a sort of good. Memory's cheap these days, and software is pretty robust, but don't go crazy and think you need to crank everything up to 600 ppi. Your files will just get huge. That's why so much of the stuff you download is low res, because you take it off the internet, and internet designers know you can't have a page that takes 3 seconds to load. Pages have to load immediately. So you're always going to find pages that are part of websites anyway, the lowest resolution possible, just enough to do the job. It can look high res. Doesn't mean it's going to be 600 ppi. You know, most printers can't address that. Most screens can't address that anyway. So stay in the ballpark of like 300 if you think you're going to be going from print to screen and back again. Okay, so that's perspective is an illusion. We see it here, a strong perspective. It's nothing. It's just how we perceive things. It's a picture of something, right? We can fake this, we can match it. Going back to the exercise, that's what we're going to try and do. I'm going to look at my original sketch, try and match that perspective in Google Earth, and then just combine the image. That's all this exercise is about. If I look back at my farm image here, all right, I had two sort of key problems. One, matching the perspective and getting the color remotely in the same color space as the other photo, right? The sky can't be all orangey and red because my field is not orangey and red. This was shot middle of the day, so it has to be sort of neutral light. So I had this idea, you have to match the colors more or less. And there's no sort of law of how to, you just got to use your eye, start training your eye to see these things. You know, if I put up a sunset sky, you would see it immediately. It doesn't match. This can't be sunset, the light we're looking at, and with the shadows a tip off too. So that's part of the work, is getting them to match. That's not likely to happen when we're pairing our boxes with Google Earth aerial photography. That's okay. We're just going to learn how to do some basic Photoshop editing. The other thing that is the work of this project is getting rid of the sky. Well, it's easy to get rid of the open space of the sky, but the work comes in the details, right? If I zoom in here, you can see that I spent a fair amount of work making sure I kept what I could keep and got rid of what I could get rid of, right? See, I got rid of the old sky in the blank spaces here. That's all extra work. This is extremely time consuming to do this. Made sure this, you know, all these little spaces, but I didn't go crazy, right? I know you might see this, but you're not going to see this, for example, as wrong. And the trees are a particular problem. They're very, this'll tip you off really quickly if the images don't line up. So that's where the art is. Photoshop editing is the art of masking pixels or deleting pixels. If you look at this little icon here in the lower right, you can see that what I've done is I've masked the sky. It's actually still there. Masking is just slightly more complex than erasing. So when I teach, and look, I ran out of time, I'm like, look, I can't deal with deleting all these individual leaves anymore, so I left that. And you know, in the milieu of things, you don't notice it. I think that even got cropped out. You know, you're focusing on the tractor. That's how people see. I also know how people, you know, you got to know how people are going to perceive this. And, you know, no one's, except real sharpshooters, are going to be like, I don't know about that sky. So anyway, so the time in this project was the time of deleting the sky. That's where the time in Photoshop comes in, and that's the important thing. So there's a few ways to do that, and that's really what I'm going to demo in this video. I think the rest of it is fairly straightforward. And now I'm going to go ahead and look at my sketch that I saved. And I'm going to open both of them. I'm not sure which one I'm going to want to use. Anyway, so I kind of like this one better. I'm not sure why, I just do. So let's go to Google Earth, and now I'm just going to try and match that perspective. All right, so here's our site. It's basically the soccer field. I know you want the soccer field to still be there, I know. And my task now is to try and match the perspective in Google Earth that I'm seeing in my sketch. I can't change my sketch. My sketch is what it is, right? I can't adjust that at this point. So just using what I do know about perspective and how this works, I'm going to try and match it as closely as possible, just visually. And I think you'll be surprised that you can get it close, and that'll be kind of good enough. So I see that I've got kind of a deep V here. This is I'm like almost right above it. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm looking for a deep V. I'm just visually trying to see what fits. I feel like I'm off to the east a little bit here. And it's almost symmetrical, but not quite. The one on the right's a little steeper. And then I trust that the back ones are going to be okay. I kind of like where I'm at right now, actually. I think I'm pretty good. You want to get this as close as possible. You can do some adjustments in Photoshop, but not really. But let's put it this way: the closer you are matching it, the easier your editing is going to go. All right, I don't have all day, so I'm going to take this. It's not bad. So I'm going to go to File, Save Image. Maximum resolution, why not? I turn off all the other stuff and map options. You don't want streets on, you don't want anything else. You just want that picture. So this is going to be my Photoshop aerial base. And remember, you should code. I forgot to look at the date again, but trust me, when I'm working, I always code in the date that the photo was taken. All right, now I'm going to open that export in Photoshop. And my goal is to join these two images, that one and that one. And these are going to magically become buildings that I'm proposing on my site here. Let's check the size of this. This is the raw high-res export from Google Earth. So image pull down, image size. You can see that it comes in at a 96 ppi and 50 inches by 33. That's a large image. That's a huge, that's 4 feet by 3 feet if I were to ever print this at full size. And 96 ppi. my photo from my phone is also huge, 72 ppi. These actually might line up okay. I don't really care if they do or not because this is a sketch and I'm just, I'm going to make them fit. If we zoom in, we see how Photoshop represents pixels. Okay, now you can't actually zoom in on a physical pixel, but this is a representation of the pixels in that image. If I look at that image again, I've been getting the width and height in inches, but I can also get them in pixels. 4800 by 3252 pixels is what this Google output is. So each one of these squares is a pixel. If you count these up and divide them by the number of inches, you'll see that it's 96 pixels per inch in both directions. Why I am concerned with this is when you are bringing a photo on top of a photo, these line up. It's almost like two ice trays nesting in each other. So if the other image that I'm about to bring in here is lower res or higher res, it doesn't matter because the pixels are going to line up. It's like putting a crossword puzzle on top of another crossword puzzle, or any other choose your grid metaphor. Ice cube trays, crossword puzzle, grids, they must line up. You'll never have a pixel that goes halfway through it. Now it looks like we have things that are curved and gradual, right? These are clearly curved architectural lines. But when you zoom in, you see that each individual pixel is only one thing. It can only have one color. Notice that to make a curved effect, we have this array of colors that happens, right? It goes from white to dark and it's gradual. And this is something that is quite impossible to fake with editing. This is why you can still spot Photoshop fakes, because this is almost impossible to reproduce. Now there are some tools that will give us soft effects like that, where we can gradually, and you'll never find a hard line in any real photo. It's always a series of sort of transitions, right? That's just how it works, digital photography. But we see them as lines. We read this as a white line, right? Well, we know, even if we were to go in real life and look at a line on a grass, painted on the grass, we know that it's going to be an approximation of a line. Maybe that's a good metaphor here. Okay, so let's go. I'm going to bring, just conceptually, I think it's easier if I bring this into the other photo. So I'm going to do a Control-A, select all, Control-C, Windows copy, go into my original here and do a Control-V, Windows paste. Now mine actually is almost about the right size, and I didn't hit that perspective very well, but we're going to make do with this. In Photoshop, each new thing that you bring in is its own layer. I'm going to turn both layers off. So by definition, the first layer comes in as a background layer, right, in any photo. And so if I turn on my background layer, I can see that that's that photo. Background layers, I don't want to get into it, but just double click on it and make it not a background layer anymore. Let it have a layer name. And you can rename these. I'll call this base. I'll call this design. Background layers behave differently, so you don't really. I've never found a use for them in the type of work I do. Maybe you'll find a use for them, or maybe not. So all I need to do really is get rid of stuff that ain't my design. Here are the editing tools that we'll use a lot. Let's look at this eraser tool. This works kind of how you'd expect. It is like a eraser. It erases the image. And you can see when I have this tool selected, I've got some options. My context sensitive menu changes. I can hit the pull down and change the size of it. I can make it soft or hard edged, right? And this is just going in there, and it looks like it's round, but we already established there's nothing round in Photoshop. Pixels are square. But notice how it blends that edge in to make it look round. It'll do the best round approximation you can. So that's a sort of medium all-purpose thing. You can go soft round, and this softens the edge even more. I'm using the right bracket key to just make this bigger. And look how soft that is. Right? That's really making a soft deletion of the pixels. Now I'm hard deleting these pixels. I'm erasing these pixels. I'm assuming that you're just starting off. See the difference between a softness, a soft eraser tool, that's very soft, and a hard eraser tool, right? Very different effect on how it works. So I can use an eraser tool to get rid of a bunch of it, but I want to be careful because I'm not sure I'm going to need some of it, right? I'm going to try and maintain the boundary, at least for a while. It's probably not accurate. I think I failed to, in my sketching exercise, I didn't actually scale the boundary. So I'm not expecting this to fit perfectly. Okay, so we're starting to see more and more this thing is fitting into the site just by using this big sort of clumsy erasing tool. Now I'm going to need to do some fancier erasing as I get into the details of this. And like I said, good Photoshop work is good pixel selection, is good erasing and masking work. So this erasing tool, even if I dial it down, is only going to get me so far, right? I'm more interested in some of these other selection tools. Going in order, I have this rectangular marquee tool. If I click and drag a rectangle, those pixels within the rectangles have been selected. This is what's been known as marching ants. When you have marching ants, if I hit delete, it's going to delete within that selection. If you have a selection and you want to add to it, if I hold down Shift, notice I get the plus sign on my cursor. I can add pixels to it. I'm just adding to that selection. And take care because it's going to delete whatever layer is current. If you accidentally have the wrong layer current and hit delete, it's going to delete the pixels from that layer. Control Z to undo that, make my design current, and hit delete. If you don't hit Shift, it'll start a new selection set. So Shift adds to it. If I want to subtract from it, I can hold down Alt. Alt subtracts from a selection set in Photoshop. Just hitting delete to get rid of those pixels. Well, that's going to get me, if I was living in a square world and not in a perspective world, that would be really useful. But I've got to hit some angles here. The most useful tool I've found is this polygonal lasso tool. So it's on the next one down, polygonal lasso tool. And here you're picking points like with the pen tool in Illustrator, but I can make a complex polygon, right? And you can double click, left mouse button, double click to close it. And now if I hit delete, I'm trimming those pixels in a very accurate way, right? So I'm trying to get in on my design without getting too crazy about it. I was at a conference once, a Photoshop conference, and the presenter was just amazing. I'm sort of a Photoshop hack, right? I do enough for planning docs, which tend to not be very sophisticated compared to like photographers and gamers and stuff. And he was demonstrating masking with a portrait using hair. So I think trees are bad. You should try masking, someone's hair. It's really, really challenging. So I'm just going in there and getting rid of stuff that's not my site. If it's not my site, I'm getting rid of it. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because time is of the essence here. But you can. The amount of time you spend on this process will be a big determinant in how good the project ends up looking. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. So I'm just carefully selecting and deleting those pixels. In this file, you'll recall that I masked the pixels. I didn't actually delete them. It's just a little harder to do. So I'd recommend going through this first exercise, unless you're really comfortable with it, then you can look up how to do it on LinkedIn. I'm not gonna demo that. It's a level of complexity that if you're a beginner is a little daunting. But what's nice about it is that it's non-destructive editing. You can go in there and if you wanted to bring back the sky because it's still there. So masks are great and I recommend them, but at first they're harder to do. So my sky is still there and I could bring it back if I wanted to. But like I said, it's an extra level of step that's just a little confusing for beginners. It looks like they're deleted, so for our purposes we're just going to call them deleted, and we're going to actually do destructive editing on this. But as you move forward, as you get comfortable in Photoshop, look up masking. That's the right way to do this. Okay, so I would go through, oh, and I guess I should touch on, there's a few, you'll find them sooner or later, so-called quick selection tools that will attempt to delete what it thinks you want deleted. Nothing wrong with trying them. Sometimes they work perfectly. In my experience, or sometimes maybe they'll get you pretty close. Like here, I like what that did. I just need to remove some things it selected that I didn't want selected. So I'm holding down Alt and just removing some pixels, and then the rest of the selection is okay. Control D to deselect the marching ants. So the quick selection tools, there's a object selection tool. That was kind of new. I don't even know what that does. Then there's the quick selection tool. That's sort of, you can click and it tries to get, it'll usually go up to a hard border. So you can see here it avoided the grid, but it went up to my property line. That's actually a fairly good result. That's pretty sophisticated. They're definitely getting better, no question about that. Better than they used to be. But what I've found, and then there's another one called Magic Wand Tool, which is basically purports to do the same thing. And nothing wrong with giving them a try. If they work, you've just saved yourself a bunch of time. What I've found is that in real life, if you're in a hurry, they tend to not work. If you've got all day, like I'm not particularly pressed right now, they're working fine. But if I was on a deadline and needed to do this, no way. It's just one of those, sort of truisms. So this, I'm not sure if you can see clearly what's going on. I'm going a little fast here. But I'm basically just deleting pixels. I'm deleting pixels. You can change how Photoshop displays the pixels that are selected. I'm going to go to, where is this actually? Select and select and mask. And here we can change, we can change how, there's different ways. All this is doing, it's not changing my selection, it's changing how my selection is displayed. This red overlay, some people like that. You can turn down the opacity of it. I don't know. It's if that's better or worse, it's okay. Try it, whatever works for you. You can also, in this tool, you can add some feathering. Let's say those hard edges that you're creating are throwing off your photo. You can add a little bit of what's called feathering, and that's going to soften up the edges a little bit. And it should show that. Might be taking a minute to do it. Oh, there we go. So you see how it's adding a softness to the edges as I adjust the feathering. You can also, within certain limits, shift that edge. If it's really off, you can try and shift it a little bit. Again, these types of things, I find they work when you don't actually need them. There's no substitute for getting in there and actually just like making it happen, making the hard selections happen. But like I said, no reason not to try some of the speed tools. Control D to deselect. I'm going to go ahead, I'm almost there, so I might as well finish this off. All right, so there's my site. Control D, deselect. Now it's out of scale with everything. And actually, my perspective is not horrible. So I want to just be able to manipulate this. I'm going to do a Control T. That gets me a Windows bounding box. That's image transform. Let's see, Control D, or sorry, Escape, deselect. You can also go edit, transform, sorry, free transform. That's your basic Windows box with all the, rotate, scale, skew, all that stuff. So I just want to make this a little smaller. Now, in this case, I don't have to hold down Shift. It works the opposite. If I hold down Shift, it lets me warp my aspect ratio, something you almost never want to do. If I don't hold down Shift, it maintains the aspect ratio. So it behaves a little differently than my default in Photoshop. So you can see my Oak Street line is pretty on. My sideline is a little skewed. I'm going to delete that anyway. It's actually not terrible. I'm fairly happy with how this turned out. I'm just going to get this to about the right place and hit enter to accept those defaults. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and delete everything else. I really don't need that property line. Now, if you use the KMZ, if I would have opened up that KMZ file and had my red property line, I might want to maintain it. But actually, in this case, that property line is not helping me. It's just emphasizing that my thing is a little off. Looks like it's floating a little, and it is. So I'm just going to scooch this over and use my arrow keys to get it in about the right place. It fits on the site actually pretty nice. I'm going to just accept that. So this is the basics of the project. Now, to dress this up a little bit, we'd want to bring in some trees and some people, maybe add some green to the base or something. At this point, once you've got a good match, you can experiment a little bit with things. For example, if I needed a tree, how am I going to get trees on my site? Well, one thing you can do, it's not a bad idea, is to find trees that are sort of within the field already and copy them. So I'm going to have my base current. I'm going to go ahead and pick a tree more or less at random here. And I'm going to do a Control C and a Control V. The Control V is the paste, and it just pasted it on top of itself. I'm going to get my move command, that's the top icon there, and it's just going to move that whole layer. Pretty much one image, one layer, right? And so maybe I want to put this in front of my buildings to give it some convincing depth. I just need to scooch that layer to the top, and now I'm starting to see a little bit of convincing depth. And that process can be repeated. I could do a Control V again. Right, maybe I'll cluster them a little so they don't look quite so phony. That's one way of adding trees. And now I've got a bunch that are separate layers. I'll select those layers and just merge them. So I have one layer of trees. And my trees are going to want to be in front of the building. At least these are. Trees, front of building. Of course, to really complete this, I would want some trees that are also in back of the buildings, right? So I'm going to do a Control A for select all. That only selects the current layer. Control C for copy, Control V for paste. And now I've got all those trees again. And I'm going to call this trees in back of buildings. Now I have to move that layer in back of the design. So that's sort of what I'm looking for there. And I don't need these other two, so I'm just going to delete those. All right, so let's look at our layers. We've got our base, we've got our design, we've got trees in back of the design, right? You see what's happening there? And I've got trees in front of the design. So that's grounding those images pretty nicely. And there are other ways of doing this. One sort of quick way is to use a brush. So if I go down to this brush tool, I can draw in trees. I'm going to make a new layer for this and put this in front, and I'll just call this trees 02. I'd recommend giving this a try. I'm just going to try and draw some trees or shrubs. How bad can it go, right? So I've got my brush tool, and where do I get color? Well, I can pick some colors here. Well, that's a little big. Control Z to undo that. Remember the bracket keys, resize your tool. I'm going to notice how, at this point, maybe I should take a look and see what a tree looks like. Well, there's different types of green. There's darker sort of shade, and then there's lighter at the top of the crown. That's sort of a key thing. So why don't I start with some dark green, right? And this is on its own layer, right? Oh no, I'm drawing it on trees too. Oh, that's okay. Actually, no, it's not. I'm gonna maintain discipline here. Yeah, layer 1. Why isn't it drawing it there? Maybe it was. Okay. So here's the bottom of the tree. Then it gets a little lighter on top. My tool is still a little big. And then maybe there's some like highlights. I don't know. Maybe there's some berries. Okay, so that is as you zoom out, it becomes a little more convincing, but that is a horseshit tree, mainly because I'm drawing it with this circular brush. Control A, select everything on the current layer, delete. There are many, many, many kinds of brushes that you can choose from. Even in the default menu, I can choose something that's a little more leafy looking than that. Well, I'll try just whatever this one is. And oh, that's quite nice. It's funny because you would think you'd want to do it smooth, but that's not actually the case. You want some rough edges. If you look at how these trees are, they're sort of stippled. So have some fun with this. Give it a try. See if you can't, you know, this is actually, I think, time well spent. And who knows, maybe a little white highlights. That's better. That's almost too nice of a tree for what's going on here. There's one other way, or it was many, many, many other ways to add trees. There's a couple of brushes. Wouldn't it be nice if I had a brush that was actually a tree? Well, I do, and I have a people brush also. If you go to Blackboard and look at these Photoshop assets, I've got some Photoshop trees that we used in Illustrator, and that can be for page 2 in the foreground. And I've also got these ABR files. I've got a trees ABR and a silhouette ABR, and these are so-called brush files. And I'm going to go ahead and download those, and let's see if I can't get them loaded. Let's first off go to the window pull down and look at the brushes panel, and from here somewhere we should be able to, here we go, import brushes, and it's looking for my ABR. File type, so remember where you downloaded them. I've got 2, looks like it won't do them both at once, so let's load silhouettes, and let's do the same thing again, and we'll load trees. Okay, there's many, many brush libraries out there. You can buy them. There's some free ones available. I don't remember where I got these. But these are actually like little tree shapes for your brush. So I'm going to make a new layer called brush trees. And let's just see what it looks like. And okay, so it just sort of stamps, Control Z to undo that, just sort of stamps a tree on there. I don't know if these are going to be useful or not. Probably not in their current, in their right out of the box form. But maybe. I haven't checked every one of them out yet. Although you can sort of see, you can sort of preview what they look like. I'm going to keep the opacity up and just check it out. It's kind of a nice shape. I think it's got maybe some use. What if I use these as sort of the base of shrubs I'm going to draw? And you know, I can start. Actually, that looks pretty nice. This is meant to be a willow tree, I believe, but it makes for kind of makes for a better looking shrub. It might be useful, might be not. I'm gonna make it a little smaller. Go to a like a lighter color. Maybe kick my opacity down a little bit. A little more. You know, this is sort of like the fun part where you can sort of play with them a little bit. Try some, you know, more artistic Photoshop stuff. So you can see I'm having better results when I use less. These I've destroyed. My foreground ones are looking a little better. So that's what these are about, and possible to use them, I suppose, right out of the box as well. Let me get my opacity back up. As a sort of shortcut, everything should get smaller as they move into the distance. They're not horrible considering we're talking one touch, right? So it's not terrible. And then maybe I could dress them up a little more. The fact that they're in elevation, it's interesting. They still work in perspective. If you wanted to get picky, you might go in there and trim some of the um, trunk to make them look a little less tall. But it's definitely getting there. Let's look at the people library and silhouettes. These are just people. Control Z to undo that. I usually bring these in with some transparency. They should be on their own layer, of course. You want full, you know, layer separation on this. And here's where it's just, this is just for scale. So, you know, the idea of showing some people, I don't even know where I put them in my situation here, but maybe on the sidewalk. And now looking at these cars, that's going to dictate how big my people are going to be. I can't cheat when I have cars right there. So you know, it's for a one-off click, it's not bad. Maybe they're up on the green roof. Whee, whee. They're a little big actually compared to the cars, and this might be something that's more useful for my street view than here. But it's funny how we know what they are, we accept them as people, and here's a mother and daughter, or what do they call it? Mom daughter. You know, it's just an indicator. Actually, these are pretty successful. I think those are working good. We suddenly sort of see how things lay out. Okay, so have some fun with that. What else might we do? Well, one last thing I might want to add is maybe some shadows. That really has a way of anchoring the boxes, the buildings to the earth. First thing I'm going to do is look around and see which way the shadows are falling on the surrounding buildings. And because Photoshop is a composite of lots of different pictures, sometimes they don't even match. So these are going to the right and up, and these are going also looks like to the right and up. Here's a pretty clear indicator here. So I want to come up at an angle and then sort of up. Here's a pretty clear shadow here. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to draw what I think the shape should be. And what is that shape? It's going to come off a corner. It goes to the right at an angle. And then where it hits the ground at the height of the building, it's parallel. So notice how this line is parallel to the building. So I'd start at the corner, come up, and then it runs parallel and back to the other corner. This takes a little practice, but it's certainly something you can do. There's no superhuman thing here. What I'm going to do is create a shape using the same polygonal lasso tool, and I'm going to come off the corner. and I'm going to go up at an angle like I said, and then parallel. Now I don't care if I go over my buildings because it doesn't matter, you're not going to see it. So I double click to close that. Now I'm holding down shift and I'm starting another one. I'm going up, I'm trying to match that angle. This angle here, starting where I think the corner is, go up at an angle, and then parallel to the building, and then parallel to the other side of the building. And I'm just double clicking it sloppy. I don't care about where it closes. And I'm going to come off each of these buildings the same way. You'll see why it doesn't matter in a second. So something like that. That should. So here, this is tricky. It should actually climb the wall of this, but I'm not gonna bother with that now. This can really contribute something to the realism. Not like we're really going for realism with massive boxes of, you know, Dove soap. So what is a shadow? It's an absence of light. And where's the absence of light going to be? Not on my design, but on the base. So I'm going to select my base layer, and all I'm going to do is make it darker in those areas where the shadow is. And because this design layer is on top of it, I don't care what happens underneath that. That's why I can be sloppy about closing those shapes. So you can darken it, but a very photographic way of considering light and dark is called exposure. So I'm going to go to my image, pull down adjustments, and look at the exposure. And here what I can do is basically give it less light. And you can see that has the effect of making it look like it's in shadow. That's not bad. I'm just going to accept that and Control D. And it's not terrible, right? It's actually all of a sudden my sloppy little joke starts to look a little more grounded and realistic. And if I were to turn off everything else, we see how sloppy those layers are. And you get the idea? I only put it where I knew it was going to be visible. I don't care what's happening here because I knew it was going to be hidden. So I'm coming off the corner, and you can see I missed the corner on this one because the shrubs were in the way. I've got other layers that I didn't turn on. And then I just took away some of the light, and I used the exposure. So if I wanted to take this a little further, how would this look on the wall here? Let's see. It would come up certainly straight at some point. I'm not seeing it for some reason. I'm just going to fake something in because it's late and I'm not seeing it. But I can see how the shadow doesn't just stop there. It's got to continue, right? Likewise here, the shadow, you've seen shadows, they fall on everything. They're not just, maybe more like that. Maybe that's what it's supposed to look like. Oops. Screwed this up. And in this case, however, it's actually on my design layer. So I'll make that layer current. And let's see if this helps or hurts. And if it hurts, I just won't do it. So if I take some of the exposure down, actually I think that's helping. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, I think that helps the illusion. I'm spacing on how it's supposed to look right now, but I don't think it's quite accurate, but I do think it finishes off the illusion because the shadows don't just end at a wall. They should climb the wall somehow. I'm sure I'm not quite right how this is meeting the other building, but again, if it's mostly right, it's gonna get you there. It's gonna sort of it's gonna work. So there's a quick and dirty example of how I'm doing a quick massing study of my design right into the view, and it gives me a lot of information about what I'm proposing on this site. Page 2 is essentially the same steps. You're just going to use a different view, and your silhouettes will be larger. So try and match perspective as best you can. I'm not going to take you through another page because it's exactly the same steps. See if you can get something happening with an eye level perspective. And for the third sheet of the exercise, check the other video I'll send you a link on, or that I've sent you a link on. All right, so we've just scratched the surface. Photoshop is an extremely deep program, but hopefully you learned, and even if you knew some Photoshop already, hopefully you learned a couple things here that's going to help you out in your work. Thanks for watching.